Welcome to the Cambridge Financial Podcast with Bert Salazar, CEO at Cambridge Financial Partners, LLC. This podcast is all about tax-preferred retirement planning, economics, financial risk management, and achieving a risk-free and successful financial life. Now, your host, Bert Salazar. Bert Salazar. Bert Salazar.
Hey, good day everyone. Welcome to the Bert Salazar Retirement Show. My name is Bert Salazar, and as always, I am the host for this show and this podcast. So once again, I'm excited to be here with all of you. Just some great news. A week and a half ago, my youngest daughter, Kelly, got married to my son-in-law, Mark, and they both got married in Portland, Oregon, and we were there, we had a great time, and what an incredible wedding. It was a magical wedding, so I wish both of them the very best, and we had a really good time. And I'll tell you some things that I found out in Portland. You go to any restaurant, and when you look at the menu in the restaurant, there's a side note on the menu where they are going to add an additional fee for each person sitting at a table, because of the fact that they have had an increase in small business taxes and an additional tax to help the homeless, an additional tax for the increase in minimum wages. So, at the end of the day, one of the things that I've always said is how when you increase taxes on small businesses, the consumer is going to be the one that's going to end up paying for it. So those are things that I'm seeing right now, and I'm seeing those things with my own eyes. And I would imagine that many of you are seeing that as well. So today's episode is actually number 163, and I call it the economic chaos of Let's Go Brandon of 2021. And for those of you that may not know what the meaning of Let's Go Brandon is, just Google it and you'll get a kick out of it. But one of the first things that I want to share with you, and I always do this, I've done it many a times, is that, if I'm going to talk about any portion of economics that may have some political inclination, I want to let each and every one of you know that I am not a Republican, I am not a Democrat, I'm a libertarian. And by the same token, Republicans have done incredibly bad things to this country, and so have Democrats. But because of the fact that the Democrats are actually controlling all three branches of the U.S. government, then obviously it's apropos for me to have a discussion with all of you, regarding the economic chaos of 2021. And one of the things that I want to start with is inflation. And many of you, obviously, you see inflation every day because you can feel it, especially when you go to the grocery store, you're going to gas up and whatever you do and so forth. There's an inflation that you can see the increase in prices. But inflation is nothing more, nothing less than too many dollars chasing too few products. And I think we're seeing that increasing quite rapidly in the United States over the last several months. Now, according to all the publications that we read, inflation is now at a 5.4%, but essential items have increased at a much higher rate than that. So when you factor all of the products and services that are sold in this country, if the average is 5.4%, then the essential ones are going to be just way north of that. So, but even when you factor that in, even if it was at 5%, if you happen to be in the 30% tax bracket, that means that you have to earn 6.5% on your money, whether it's an increase in salary or an increase in the rate of return that you're getting from all of your investments, in order to pay taxes on that money and then have a net of 5% to match inflation. Always remember that inflation is not tax deductible, so you got to figure out what your individual tax rate is. So if it is at 5.4%, then you have to add your tax rate to that number, and that's the amount that you have to earn on a gross basis in order to mitigate the challenges of inflation in the United States today. Now, when we get into the essential items, and there are several of them, but I'll just mention a few. If you take a look at gasoline prices, they have actually gone up not 5.4%, they have gone up 42%. And unless you live in a major metropolitan city where you don't need to drive because you have transportation everywhere, chances are you're feeling that pain right now quite heavily because it's taken almost 50% more just to be able to gas up your car and fill up your tank. Now, used cars have gone up in price by 24.4%. If you want to buy a TV, you want to buy a smart TV, the price has increased by 12.7%. Furniture, 11.2%. Meat, poultry, fish, eggs, 10.5%. So you can see that a lot of the essential items that Americans are consuming every day, the increase in income is not even close. As a matter of fact, on an income basis, for 2021, we're at a negative increase, because even if you were a minimum wage earner and your income went to 15%, well, you can kiss that one goodbye, because it's not even close to meeting the inflation rate of your essential products that you're purchasing on an ongoing basis. So along those lines, obviously unemployment is at 5%, and it has come down, but definitely is not a good thing. One of the things that is very critical about unemployment, and this is something that all of you need to pay attention to, because when you start to read statistics, depending on who's putting out the numbers, remember, there are lies, damn lies, and then statistics. So you can squelch those numbers and you can powder those numbers any which way that you want. But one of the real items that I pay a lot of attention to is the percentage of Americans that have actually left the workforce from 1 month to the next. And that's how I start to do projections as to where I think inflation is going to be in the future, or unemployment, and what impact is that going to have on my clients, on their retirement assets, their retirement accounts, their retirement living, and so forth. So in August of 2021, 4.3 million Americans left the workforce. And that means it's about 3% of the employed workforce in the U.S., and that's a big number. When people are just walking away and no longer looking for jobs because perhaps they're receiving, unemployment benefits and they don't want to work, or they're just tired of looking for something that they can't find and they just walk away, that's really, really bad, because it's going to have a negative impact on that unemployment rate of 5%. Now, although that is the case, and this may be one of the reasons why there's so many jobs available in the U.S., there are now approximately 10.4 million jobs available, and no one is there to fill them up. And now we're starting to see all of these things that you see with the supply chain, and the fact that there are not enough people to work to help along those lines, and not enough truck drivers, and whatever that may be. But that all has a negative connotation to everything that we're doing today in this country. High unemployment benefits have accelerated this process. So the more money the government is throwing at people, the less the dependency on having to go out and work, and the more the dependency, or the higher the dependency on the government. And many a times, the Democratic Party is one of the parties that depends on that wholeheartedly, because they want more and more people to be dependent on the government, because they can pretty much be the puppeteers, and then the American people would become puppets and will pretty much do whatever it is that the party may want them to do, because they're receiving money at a high rate that otherwise they would have to go out and work for. So, like I said, high unemployment benefits have accelerated this process. Why work when you can do just as well by staying at home? Obviously, that goes without saying. Employer vaccination mandates are also creating forced employee terminations and/or resignations. And this is something that is very critical because we don't have enough people to fill the jobs that we have. We have people walking away altogether from looking for jobs. And on top of that, you're going to be forcing Americans to be vaccinated through their employer. And if they refuse to get vaccinated, then you're either going to be terminating, the companies are going to be either terminating those employees, or the employees are going to have no other choice but to submit their resignations. Now, essential workers, and this is something that's very, very critical, essential workers are being terminated for failure to vaccinate in 2021. And this is while they were being hailed as heroes when they were working without being vaccinated in 2020. You see, in 2020, there was no vaccine. So these essential workers, police, fire, doctors, nurses, they were going into the trenches every single day, exposing themselves, exposing their families in order to provide a critical service to the American population. And everybody was saying that they were heroes. This administration hailed them as heroes. The Trump administration hailed them as heroes. We placed them on a major, major pedestal, which they deserve to be there because they were doing an incredible job, and they were doing the type of job that most Americans wouldn't want to do, especially because of the tremendous exposure to the coronavirus or the Chinese or the China virus, as you may want to call it, and they were willing to go and work without having a vaccine available. And now that there is a vaccine available, some of these employees don't want to get vaccinated, whether it's political, whether it's medical, whether it is religious. But at the end of the day, now that they're not willing to get vaccinated, then you're saying to these people, or this administration is saying to these people, and the employers are saying, look, if you don't get vaccinated, I'm going to fire you. I don't care how good you were last year. I don't care the fact that you were my hero last year. Now I'm going to fire you because I have the ability to do so. That is really, really sad. And as I always say, ladies and gentlemen, no good deed ever goes unpunished. So that's something that we all need to deal with. I'm hoping that a lot of the employers are going to go back and kind of take a look at those guidelines, and that the government will do the same. But at the end of the day, my body, my choice. If it's my body, I want to make certain that I decide what goes into my system. And I am one that I'm fully vaccinated. So, I do recommend everyone to get vaccinated, but I don't want to make it a mandate from a business perspective, because that's going to be hurting all of the small businesses throughout the United States, and it's going to hurt the supply chain because now you're going to have less and less people in the actual workforce. Interesting note, though, the note is that more Americans have actually died from COVID in 2021 than all of 2020, and we're only in October of 2021. And now we have 3 vaccines. We have all kinds of pharmaceutical remedies that Americans can take. So it's really interesting that more people have died under this administration than in the last administration, because everybody claims that the Trump administration did not do a good job, although that administration was the one that accelerated the process for us to have the vaccines that we have today. And I call it the way it is. I don't care if it's a Republican or a Democrat. I'm going to call it the way it is. So it's pretty hypocritical for us to say that. And yet we have more people dying in 2021 than all of the people that died in 2020. And we're only through October of 2021. Changing gears a little bit. And all of these things, as you can tell, that I have talked about so far, has had and will continue to have a major economic impact on your retirement assets, on you, on your family, on all of us. And this is what this podcast is all about, bringing about the things that you need to do in order to maximize your retirement income while minimizing your retirement liabilities, and also the clear understanding of the things that you can control and the things that you cannot control, because you have to be able to look at your finances through a telescope as opposed to a microscope. So what I'm trying to do now is bring you the telescopic view of your finances through this podcast called The Economic Chaos of 2021. Now, shifting gears one more time, the southern border, has actually become a national security issue with no resolution in sight. As a matter of fact, the Supreme Court has forced the Biden administration to reinstate the Trump stay in Mexico policy, because it was a policy that worked tremendously well. During the Trump administration, we had the least amount of border crossings that we had in the previous 30 years. And now, as of this fiscal year, at the end of the fiscal year, we had the highest amount of border crossings in the history of the United States ever since they started to take and maintain records of all the border crossings. I think we're now 1.7, almost 1.8 million crossings so far for the fiscal year 2021. So now the Supreme Court is forcing the Biden administration to reinstate the Trump stay in Mexico policy. And now the Biden administration has to renegotiate that policy. And we all know they don't want to do this, but they don't realize that this is creating a national security issue as well. How many of these people are crossing the border that we have not been able to vet? How many of them are going to create problems? Their crime rate. How many of them are going to increase the unemployment rate? How many of them are going to become homeless because they're not able to find a type of job that they're going to be able to qualify for? And the fact that these people are coming in and they're not being vetted for COVID, how many of those are bringing COVID with, or at least a virus with them, and maybe impacting our local neighborhoods and in our cities, communities, states, and obviously the U.S. In the overall. So those are things that are very critical, and all of those things are going to have a negative impact as well on economics. Billions of dollars in border fence have been left to rust for political reasons, but Americans paid for it. I just read an article and saw a report of billions of dollars in fence that the Biden administration says, we're not going to build anymore, so we're just going to leave it there to rot. And that's a political decision, because we all know that if you build a fence, all the wealthy people that live in beautiful homes, they all have fences around the house. As a matter of fact, I think we just spent $545,000 to put a security fence around President Biden's summer home. So if he's willing to put a fence around his summer home to protect his summer home using U.S. dollars to do so, then why wouldn't you want to have a fence around the southern border to protect the United States of America? And most important, we have already paid for. So now you can understand, why all these potential tax increases to get more and more money from us is something that Americans are not looking at very well, because of the fact that they're saying, look, you take more and more money from me every day, but what are you doing with the money that you're taking from me? Well, you're just leaving it there to rust, and you don't care because of your political inclination. So that's something that is now coming to the surface, and we're going to see more of it as the new $3.5 trillion package is going through Congress. Now, millions of, as I said a little while ago, millions of unvaccinated aliens are coming to our southern border, and thousands are being released into our communities without, proper vaccination protocols. How can you do that? We're actually forcing employees to be vaccinated because otherwise we're going to terminate their employment. Yet we have hundreds of thousands of people coming through our borders, and we don't care about getting them vaccinated or making certain that they're protected from a health perspective as well. Now, shifting a little bit to the international world, the Afghanistan debacle has been a blemish to America in the world stage. Billions and billions of dollars in military weapons were abandoned by our government and given to the Taliban. The same people we have been fighting for 20 years, we just left billions of dollars there for them. This goes back to my argument on the border fence. Billions of dollars in border fencing is now being left to rust, and the American people paid for it. Well, who do you think paid for all the military equipment that we left in Afghanistan, and we pretty much gave it for free to the Taliban, which we had been fighting for 20 years? I mean, this is unheard of. This is absurd. Not only that, we did a fast departure from Afghanistan, and we left thousands of Americans behind, and it's not something that we should ever do again as a country. And all of those things have a negative impact because the American people are saying to themselves, how can you tell me you're going to be taxing me more because you're going to need more of my money when you are throwing the money that I have already given you? You're already throwing that money away, and you don't care because of your political decisions and your inability to run this country correctly. Now we have a supply chain crisis, and the Biden administration has no idea how to solve it. And this is something that you could have seen coming down the pike. I started to read articles back in February and March that was going to become an issue because of the policies that were being implemented, after January of 2021. So now we have this supply chain crisis, which now the holidays are going to be disturbed. That means that businesses are going to sell a lot less because they don't have the proper merchandise. Americans, obviously, it's all about supply and demand. They're demanding more and more every day. And what do you think that's going to do to the economy? And what do you think that's going to do to unemployment? What do you think that's going to be doing to inflation for the next 3 to 4 quarters, and maybe for the next few years along those lines? And, after kind of walking you through all of these things, I can tell you one thing, and I don't want you to get upset, and, I don't want you to start taking Prozac or anything like that, but this will only get worse. And it's going to get worse in a matter of, in many different ways. Because obviously we know what is happening, and the fact that, the government that we have in place today doesn't know what to do, and you have a bunch of imbeciles. I would call them economic imbeciles. And by the way, we've had economic imbeciles on the Republican Party as well. But the fact that now the Democrats are running the whole thing, they have a bunch of economic imbeciles running this country, and that is having a negative impact on your personal life. We have, for instance, a walk-away president that refuses to answer media questions. The fear of facing tough questions is relevant to all of us watching because, it's very sad, but it's also very true. When you have a president, the buck stops here. I mean, obviously you can say anything about President Trump, and he would say, stupid things all the time. But one of the one things that he never refused to do is talk to the media. And I would argue that in many different ways he talked too much. He could have dialed it down a little bit, but he was always there taking questions from the media. But this precedent is being run by a bunch of puppeteers, and they're forcing him because he just doesn't have the ability to engage in a conversation and give viable responses to all of the economic challenges that we're having. And this is sad but true, but this administration is creating and has created the perfect economic storm. The Biden administration is now pitching a $3.5 trillion package at the worst possible time in American history. The administration claims no cost for this package whatsoever, but I think that the American people know better, and I think all of you know better. There's no such a thing as a free lunch from an economic standpoint. Small businesses, and this is something that I covered when I started this podcast because of my trip to Portland for my daughter's wedding, but small businesses are having to add a meal surcharge because of additional costs of doing business. 25%, as I said, for increase in business tax, new homeless service tax, new corporate activity tax, and increase in minimum wages. All of these things are having a negative impact on inflation because, ladies and gentlemen, the consumers always pay. And that's what the Biden administration does not want to admit. Now, they know it because they're not stupid people, but because of their political upheaval and their political entities that are supporting them, they don't want to admit it, and they think that the American people are stupid. You have Jen Psaki, coming every single day saying stupid things, and she really thinks that the American people are that stupid and they don't understand what is happening. Corporations don't pay taxes. Small businesses don't pay taxes. They are a collector of taxes. So when you increase the price of meat from the supplier to the stores, what do you think the grocery stores are going to do? Do you think they're going to be absorbing that? They're not going to absorb that. They're going to pass it on. Because really, if you think about it from a business standpoint, if you have a corporation, there are only three ways that you can take care of an increase in prices. One, you can pass on that increase to the shareholders by lowering their dividends. And what do you think that's going to do? Well, shareholders are going to take their money out and they're going to go to another company that is not increasing or that is giving them more for their money. So corporations are not going to do that. They're not going to have a negative impact on their shareholders. What is the second thing that they can do? Well, they can start reducing benefits that they're paying their employees. And they're not going to want to do that because obviously if you start reducing those benefits that you're paying to your employees are going to walk out the door and they're going to go somewhere else. Or number three, they're going to be increasing the prices that they sell those products for in order for the consumer to pay for it. And that's the easier way because then that way you don't have to reduce a dividend that you would have paid your shareholders, so you can continue to receive those investments so you can grow your business and your corporation. And number two, you're not going to be reducing benefits to employees along those lines. And therefore, you're going to be able to maintain a strong an employee and corporate relationship, which is going to be very, very important for the growth of that company over the long term. I think the last point that I want to make is, of all these things that I have talked about for the last 28 minutes or so, all these things are having and will continue to have a major economic impact on each and every one of our lives, each and every one of your lives. So what's the impact on current and future retirement dollars? That's a question that each and every one of you need to ask yourselves along those lines. Will you have to work longer? Will you have to live on less? Will you have to downsize in order to offset all of these economic pressures from this economic perfect storm that is now hitting your pocketbook? I'll tell you, I'm very disappointed. I thought that, in many different ways now, based on what the Biden administration kept talking about that they wanted to do during the election. There were a lot of red flags there, and I even did a podcast that I called it "I Told You So," because this is probably the saddest "I told you so" in the history of the world, because all of us, all of you, should have seen this coming. And if you didn't see it coming, that, like I always say, that the blindest person in the world is the one that refuses to see. But you have to start taking a look at your finances. You have to start taking a look at all of your assets, all of your investments. You have to look for assets that can outpace inflation. You may have to delay your retirement. You may have to take less out of your retirement accounts, because if you continue to live at the same level that you were living up until today, then chances are you're definitely going to run out of money before you run out of life. And that's going to be one of the worst things that you can do for yourself and your family. So for those of you that may want to pick my brain as to, some of the things that you should be doing in order to offset the Let's Go Brandon chaos, and go out and Google "Let's Go Brandon" and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about, unless you're willing to do that. But if you want to get a hold of me and pick my brains, feel free to call me. You can reach out to me at area code 786-766-1042. You can also send me an email at Bert, B-E-R-T, at bertsalazar.com, B-E-R-T at bertsalazar.com. And always remember that my goal for you and for your family, even with all these predicaments that we're going through, is to kind of help you change the way you see things. Because when you change the way that you see things, the things that you see change. So once again, thank you so much for giving me a little bit of your time today to talk about all of these things that we're being impacted with, and how to get them resolved and how to look at them. And I'll see you again next week with another podcast. I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.